The hand came out of nowhere. One moment, Dr. Harrison Blake's palm connected with Maya Chen's shoulder. Not a tap, not a brush, but a deliberate shove that sent her stumbling backward into the supply cart. The crash of falling equipment echoed through the emergency department. A kidney basin hit the floor. 3 packages of gauze scattered across the linoleum. Every nurse, every orderly, every resident within earshot froze. Blake didn't look back. "Get out of my way, little girl," he said, already moving toward the bed. "Some of us have real work to do." Nobody moved to help her. Nobody said a word. That was Tuesday. On Thursday, a former Navy SEAL legend, a man who had survived 30 years in the most dangerous places on Earth, a man so unbreakable that his team called him Ironside, was wheeled through the double doors of St. Mercy General Hospital bleeding from 3 separate wounds. He was barely conscious. But the moment his clouded eyes found Maya Chun standing at the edge of the trauma bay, something cracked open in his face that no mortar round, no bullet, no number of years in the dark had ever managed to crack. He started to cry, and suddenly, everyone in the building wanted to know. Who, exactly, had Harrison Blake shoved out of his way? St. Mercy General Hospital's emergency department at 6 a.m. had a particular smell. Coffee gone cold, antiseptic, and the specific metallic tang of exhaustion that settles into the walls of any place that never truly sleeps. Maya Chun had grown used to it in the 8 months since she'd first walked through the automatic sliding doors and taken a position as an ER floor nurse. She was 27 years old, 5 feet 4. She had a habit of wearing her hair in a single practical braid, of keeping her badge turned slightly inward so you had to look twice to read it, and of moving through the department with the kind of quiet efficiency that either went completely unnoticed or was mistaken for timidity. The senior staff had mostly settled on timidity. Chun, charge nurse Rachel Park appeared at her elbow, tablet in hand, voice low. "Blake's team is coming down for the Henderson consult. You want to just hang back? It's easier." Maya glanced up from the medication chart she was reviewing. "Easier than what?" Rachel gave her the look. The look said, "You know what." Maya did know. She'd known for 8 months. She handed the tablet back and picked up the blood pressure cuff she'd been holding. "I'll be fine, Rachel." She was not, technically, fine 40 minutes later. Dr. Harrison Blake swept into bay for the way he swept into every room he entered, like the room had been waiting for him, like the air itself recognized his importance. He was 46, broad-shouldered, silver-templed, and possessed of the particular brand of arrogance that metastasizes in men who are genuinely skilled and have been told so, loudly, for too long. He was, by most technical measures, an excellent surgeon. He was also, by any human measure, a deeply unpleasant person. The Henderson consult was a 68-year-old man with chest pain that Maya had flagged as potentially atypical. She had noted it in the chart, a specific phrasing about the pain's radiation pattern, its relationship to posture, a subtle finding in the preliminary ECG that her instinct had snagged on like a nail catching fabric. She'd highlighted it in yellow. Blake flipped past the highlighted section without reading it. Maya was standing at the foot of the bed, clipboard held in front of her, and she said, "Dr. Blake, I flagged a note about the ECG pattern. It may be worth." Blake didn't stop moving. He didn't look at her. He leaned over Mr. Henderson, pressed 2 fingers to the man's abdomen with brisk professionalism, and said, "I'll decide what's worth noting." "Of course," Maya said. "I only wanted to point out that the inferior lead." That was when the hand came out. She had been mid-step, moving to indicate the specific lead reading on the monitor, and Blake's palm connected with her shoulder with enough force that she stumbled backward into the supply cart. The crash was impressive. A kidney basin hit the floor. 3 packages of gauze scattered. Every person in Bay 4 went still. Blake still hadn't looked at her. "Get out of my way, little girl," he said. "Some of us have real work to do." The silence that followed was the particular silence of people calculating their own safety. Dr. Priya Nair, Blake's second, examined the floor. The 2 residents looked at each other and then at their shoes. The nurse's aide near the door turned slightly away. Maya straightened. She picked up the kidney basin. She set it back on the cart. She smoothed the front of her scrubs. She said nothing. She stepped back to the foot of the bed, where she continued to hold her clipboard, and when Blake finished his assessment and swept back out again, trailing Nair and the residents like a comet tail, Maya stood in the space he'd left and looked at Mr. Henderson. The old man was watching her with tired, apologetic eyes. He does that a lot? Henderson asked. It's not important, Maya said. She checked his foreline. Her hands were perfectly steady. How's the pain? 1 to 10. 5. Maybe 6. He paused. You going to be okay, young lady? Maya smiled at him. It was a real smile. Not performance, not armor, but genuine warmth. The kind that seemed slightly out of place with everything that had just happened. The kind that belonged to someone who had been through enough that manufactured kindness felt like a waste of energy. I'm fine, Mr. Henderson, she said. I've been through worse. This was, by any reasonable accounting, the understatement of the year. She went back to her notes. She sent a secondary flag to the attending cardiologist directly, bypassing Blake's team entirely, making sure someone else saw the inferior lead finding. 3 hours later, the cardiologist ordered an emergency catheterization that revealed a 90% occlusion in Henderson's right coronary artery. They saved his life. Blake got the department credit for the catch. Maya changed a dressing in Bay 7 and didn't say anything about it. Rachel found her in the supply room during break, sitting on an overturned crate eating a granola bar with the focused patience of a person who has learned to eat whenever the opportunity presents itself. He shoved you, Rachel said. There was heat in her voice that Maya had not put there herself. He did. You should report it. I know. Are you going to? Maya finished her granola bar. She crumpled the wrapper carefully, stood, and tucked it into the pocket of her scrubs for the trash can. Not today, she said. Rachel stared at her. Why not today? Maya opened the supply room door. The sounds of the ER washed back in. Monitors, voices, the distant controlled urgency of a department that never fully rested. Because today, Maya said, there are people who need nurses. She went back to work. The call came in at 14:23 on Thursday afternoon. Maya was suturing a laceration in Bay 2 when the radio traffic started, clipped, professional, the specific cadence of military communication bleeding through the civilian channels. She heard it the way she heard most things, with the part of her brain that had been trained, over years, to parse signal from noise. Multiple trauma casualties. Training accident at Fort Calloway. ETA 11 minutes. Requesting trauma bay clearance. The charge desk buzzed with activity. Rachel was already on the phone coordinating. 2 trauma surgeons were being paged. Blake's team was being assembled with the usual noise and motion that accompanied anything Blake considered a significant case. Maya tied off her final suture, snipped the thread, covered the wound with a neat sterile dressing, and told her patient to stay still. She walked to the window. In the parking lot below, 2 black SUVs with government plates were pulling into the ambulance bay, followed by an actual ambulance. Lights on, no siren, which told you something about the composure of the men inside. She watched the doors open. She watched military-bearing men in civilian clothes move with the particular efficiency of people who have been trained to move precisely and have never unlearned it. Then she saw the ambulance doors open. Her hand found the window frame. She had not seen Master Chief James Morrison in 2 years. He looked older than she remembered, and she had last seen him in a ditch in Syria with shrapnel in his chest, so the bar for looking older was already set fairly high. He was on a gurney now, big, broad, wrapped in emergency bandaging at his shoulder, his side, his left leg. An oxygen mask. Eyes half open. The particular waxy pallor of significant blood loss coupled with the specific stillness of a body conserving every resource it has left. He was alive. She noted that with a specific, profound relief that she had to immediately lock away and keep out of her hands, because her hands needed to be useful, and relief didn't help hands. Chun. Rachel appeared at her elbow. They're clearing trauma 1 and 2. We need. I know what we need, Maya said. Her voice was calm. It was always calm. I'm coming. She was already moving. The trauma bay when Blake arrived was organized chaos of the functional variety. The military casualties were 3 in total. 2 men with moderate injuries being handled in adjacent bays, and Morrison, who was the critical one, surrounded by Blake's team and 2 nurses and the quiet, coiled presence of Captain Marcus Webb, who stood in the corner and watched everything with the attention of a man who is used to watching everything and trusts nothing until verified. Webb was 32. He had a jaw like a cliff face and the kind of stillness that people who've never been in combat sometimes mistake for calm. It was not calm. It was precision operating under extreme constraint. Blake was loud and in motion, calling out orders, demonstrating his competence to the assembled audience. Give me a CBC, CMP, coags. Get the portable chest and pelvic x-ray in here now. Who has his vitals? Maya moved to Morrison's left side. She checked his 4-axis, noted the gauge of the cannula, observed the rate of the saline drip. She looked at the oxygen saturation. She looked at his wound dressings and made a quiet notation in her mind about the pattern of the injuries. She had seen this pattern before. Specifically, she had seen it in blast injuries. The kind that look manageable on the surface and hide complications in the vasculature like delayed mines. The kind that sit quiet until they don't. The kind that had killed men 6 hours after they arrived on stable vitals. In hospitals with full trauma teams who had no reason to believe they were missing anything. She had seen it 3 times. Each time, she had been the only person who recognized it. She reached for his chart. Blake talked for another 90 seconds before he noticed her. Who authorized a floor nurse in my trauma bay? Several heads turned. Maya did not look up from the chart. She's on ER staff, Rachel said neutrally from the doorway. She was all ready. I don't need floor nurses in here. I need my trauma team. Blake pointed. Out. Maya put the chart down. She looked at Blake with an expression that was not hostile, not flustered, not even particularly concerned. It was simply attentive, the way a surgeon's expression is attentive when they are looking at a problem. His injury pattern is consistent with blast mechanism, she said. The shrapnel tracks on the left side suggest. I can see what the shrapnel tracks suggest. I am a board-certified trauma surgeon with 23 years of. There may be a secondary vascular injury, Maya said. She said it quietly, the way you say something you want to make sure someone actually hears past their own noise. The left iliac. It's worth imaging before you take him to the OR. Out. Webb had not moved from his corner. His eyes, however, had moved. They were now fixed on Maya Chun with an expression that nobody in the trauma bay could quite read, something between recognition and a very controlled version of disbelief. Maya stepped back. She did not leave. She moved to the perimeter of the bay, to the edge of what could reasonably be called in the way, and she stayed there, and she watched. Morrison was being assessed, being handled, being managed by capable hands. Blake was not incompetent. She knew that. She had never thought he was incompetent. She had thought he was missing something. She was almost certain now that she was right. The gurney shifted as the nurses repositioned. Morrison's head moved. His oxygen-masked face turned, and his half-open eyes swept the room with the vague, instinctive assessment of a man who has spent decades making sure he always knew who was in the room with him. His eyes found her. There are things that break men like James Morrison. Not bullets. Not improvised explosive devices. Not 30 years of deployments to places that don't appear on civilian maps. Of watching good men die in ways that their families would never fully understand. Of carrying the weight of impossible decisions made in impossible seconds under conditions that no amount of training can fully prepare you for. Those things had not broken him. They had shaped him, compressing, refining, leaving something dense and hard and permanent. But there are other things. There are the things that reach past the density and hardness and find the original person underneath. The people who saw you before you were Ironside, before you were Master Chief, before you were a legend. The people who held your life in their hands at a moment when you were just a bleeding man in a ditch, and who looked at you, not at your rank, not at your record, but at you, and said, I've got you. Morrison's eyes found Maya Chun, and something in his face cracked open. It was not a dramatic collapse. He did not sob. He did not shake. A man like Morrison would not do those things in a room full of people, would not do them even at the end of his endurance, because some habits of restraint go too deep to break. But his eyes filled, and a single tear tracked down the side of his face, past the edge of the oxygen mask, and dropped onto the pillow beneath his head. His right arm, the uninjured one, moved. It lifted, reached, trembling with the effort that costs a man who is running on empty, and his hand extended toward her across the space between them. Ghost hands, he said. His voice was barely sound, barely breath. Scraped clean of everything except the essential. Ghost hands, that you? The trauma bay went very still. Blake's hand stopped moving in the middle of a gesture. Dr. Nair looked up from the monitor. The 2 residents stared. Rachel, in the doorway, put her hand over her mouth. Maya crossed the bay in 4 steps. She took Morrison's outstretched hand in both of hers, and she held it. Carefully, completely, with the specific, gentle strength of someone who knows how to hold things that are fragile without making them feel fragile. "I've got you, Chief," she said. Her voice was very steady. "I've got you." Morrison exhaled. It was a long, shuddering breath that seemed to release something he had been holding for a very long time. Longer than the ambulance ride. Longer than the injury. Perhaps longer than 2 years. "Told my team," he said. He was fading now, sliding back toward the sedation that his body needed. "Told them you were real. They thought," a pause, a breath. "They thought I made you up. You didn't make me up. Syria." His eyes were closing. "You remember Syria?" "I remember Syria. Pulled me out of that ditch." "Pulled you out of that ditch," she confirmed, and her voice was still steady, still warm, still the voice of someone who is absolutely in control of herself, even though, if you watched her eyes, there was something in them. Not grief, not quite, but the near neighbor of it. "The country where grief lives. You disappeared," Morrison said. His voice was barely a thread now. "Looked for you. I know. I'm sorry." His eyes closed. His grip on her hand loosened, not releasing, just resting. She adjusted her hold so that his arm could lie flat without strain, and she continued to hold his hand, and she looked at him, at the worn face, the gray-threaded hair, the chest she had once repaired in conditions that would make most surgeons refuse to believe the story, and her expression was something complex and private. Nobody in the trauma bay said anything. Captain Webb straightened up from the corner. His jaw was set. His eyes, moving from Morrison to Maya and back again, held something that was not entirely readable, but was something like awe, or something like relief, or possibly both at once. Blake found his voice first. "Someone want to tell me," he said, slowly, "what is happening in my trauma bay?" It was not, technically, a question. Nobody answered it immediately. Webb spoke. "That," he said, nodding toward Maya, "is ghost hands." Silence again. Blake looked at Webb. He looked at Maya. He looked back at Webb. She's a nurse. She's whatever she wants to be," Webb said. His voice was flat and absolute. The voice of a man who has learned to deliver statements that don't require emphasis because the statements themselves carry all the weight. "And she just told you something about your patient's vascular status that you should have listened to." Blake's jaw tightened. "I don't take diagnostic guidance from the woman who operated on Master Chief Morrison in a bombed-out building in Syria by flashlight." Webb's voice did not rise. That was somehow worse than if it had. "From the surgeon who has a higher field save rate than any combat medical officer in the history of Joint Special Operations Command. From the woman with 2 bronze stars and a silver star for conspicuous gallantry." He paused. "One beat. Sir." The sir landed like something dropped from a height. Blake opened his mouth. "Image the left iliac," Maya said quietly. She was still holding Morrison's hand. She had not looked at Blake. "Please, before you take him to the OR." They imaged the left iliac. While the portable vascular ultrasound was being set up, Webb found Rachel Park in the corridor outside and began to talk. He didn't do it the way someone does when they want to tell a story. He did it the way someone does when they need a truth to exist on record, quiet, methodical, with the specific cadence of a man citing chapter and verse from something he has memorized because it mattered to him personally. "Her call sign was Ghost Hands," Webb said. They were standing near the nurse's station, 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee between them, and Rachel was very still. She served as forward surgical element attached to several JSOC units. "I can't name the specific operations. What I can tell you is that she served 3 combat tours in conditions that most conventional surgeons would consider unsurvivable." Rachel looked through the window at Maya, who was still in the trauma bay, watching the imaging prep with quiet attention, making small notations on a clipboard. "She operated without our facilities?" Rachel asked. "She operated without walls, sometimes." Webb wrapped both hands around his paper cup. "There was an operation in 2022. I was there for this one. We had a man down with a blast-induced subdural hematoma. Traumatic brain injury. The medevac helicopter was 45 minutes out, and the man had maybe 20 minutes. Ghost Hands performed an emergency burr hole procedure in a building with no electricity, no sterile field worth speaking of, and approximately 3 minutes of briefing on the patient's history." He paused. "That man is alive today. He coaches Little League in Georgia." Rachel was very quiet. Master Chief Morrison met ghost hands in 2023 in Syria, Webb continued. His unit was hit during an exfiltration. He took blast fragments to the chest. One of them had migrated to within 4 millimeters of his heart. He looked at his coffee. Field surgeons who reviewed it later said they wouldn't have touched the extraction without a full and a cardiothoracic team on standby. She extracted it in a ditch, in the dark, while his team held perimeter around them. With her hands, Rachel said softly. Ghost hands, Webb confirmed. He looked up. Morrison calls her that because of the way she moves when she operates. He said it was the first time in his career he understood the phrase surgical grace. He told me once that watching her work was like watching someone do something they were simply born to do. Like the procedure and the person were the same thing. Rachel turned this over. Why did she leave? Something shifted in Webb's face. He was careful now, in what he said and how. There was an incident, he said. Late 2023. I don't have full clearance on the details. What I know is that her unit was hit in an ambush. There were casualties. He stopped. Started again. There was a patient she couldn't save. From what I understand, it wasn't a failure of skill. The injury was unsurvivable, and she worked on him anyway for 40 minutes because that's who she is. A pause. I don't know exactly what she carries from that. But she disappeared from the roster in December 2023. Nobody knew where she went. Morrison looked for her for 2 years. Rachel looked through the window again. Maya was making a note on the imaging technician's clipboard, pointing at something on the preliminary scan with the unhurried certainty of someone who already knows what they're looking at. The technician was nodding, leaning in to see what she was indicating. Maya said something. The technician's eyebrows went up. She came here, Rachel said, to be a floor nurse. She came here, Webb agreed. No medical license. She let it lapse when she left service. She applied honestly, listed her nursing qualifications and field medicine training, because that's what her current credentials were. She was in the process of reinstatement. Something moved behind his eyes. I don't think she wanted to be ghost hands anymore. I think she needed to stop, for a while. To just be a person in a building taking care of people, without anyone expecting her to be a legend. Rachel absorbed this. And now Blake is dismissing her, Webb said. His voice was controlled, but the control was deliberate, something he was maintaining by choice. And her patient has a vascular injury she identified by clinical observation alone. And if they don't listen to her, a man who has survived 30 years of special operations is going to die on a hospital table. He set down his coffee cup. So I thought someone should know the full context. Rachel looked through the window for a long moment. Then she said, Does Dr. Walsh know any of this? Webb picked up his coffee cup again. She will shortly. The vascular ultrasound confirmed it. Left external iliac artery, partial tear, subtle, non-occlusive in Morrison's current position, but with the potential to become catastrophically occlusive under the stress of surgical repositioning or during recovery. The kind of injury that sits quiet and then doesn't. The kind that had killed men on what should have been a routine post-operative night, in hospitals with full trauma teams who had no reason to believe they were missing anything. Maya had seen it 3 times in blast casualties. She had been the only person in those instances who had seen it at all. Blake reviewed the imaging with Nair. There was a low-voiced exchange. Blake's face was unreadable, which was unusual for a man who wore his expressions the way he wore his credentials, prominently, without apology. He came out into the corridor. He looked at Maya. The imaging was appropriate, he said. The words were structured to sound like acknowledgement, but the architecture of them left no room for the actual word correct. We'll address the iliac in the primary surgery. Maya nodded. Anything else? His tone made the question rhetorical. A door, technically open, built to be closed. The shrapnel in his left shoulder, Maya said. Based on the trajectory and the depth. I've reviewed the imaging, thank you. The fragments near the axillary nerve. I said I've reviewed it. Blake's voice dropped a register. The corridor was not empty. He knew it wasn't empty. He did it anyway. You are a nurse. You are not a surgical consultant. You are not, as far as I'm aware, licensed to practice medicine in this state. You are here to maintain 4 lines and take vitals and otherwise stay out of the way of people who have the actual credentials to be making these calls. He leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, something more deliberate than aggression, the specific lean of someone who wants to feel their own size. Are we clear? Maya met his eyes. Hers were dark and entirely still. Not flinching. Not performing courage. Just still. The way still water is still, because it is what it is and has no reason to be otherwise. We're clear, she said. She stepped back. She did not look away until he did. He walked away. Maya looked at the trauma bay where Morrison was being prepped. She looked at the monitors. She looked at the blood pressure, stable, currently. She looked at the subtle variations in his heart rate that had been building for the last 20 minutes, slow and quiet, like a tide. She took out a notepad. She wrote 3 lines. Precise, specific, written in the language of someone who has spent years writing notes that might be read in a crisis by someone who needed them to be immediately actionable. She clipped the note to the inside front cover of Morrison's chart, where it would be the first thing a surgeon saw if they opened it in an emergency. Then she stepped back. Rachel appeared beside her. You going to fight him on it? I've said what I have to say, Maya replied. Maya, Rachel. She looked at her friend, and her expression was patient and tired and something else, something older than 27. I can't force him to listen. I can only make sure that if something goes wrong, someone knows what to look for. She glanced at the chart, then back at the trauma bay. Someone will look at that note. She walked back to the ER floor. Morrison had said, half conscious, you disappeared. She had said, I know. I'm sorry. She had not stopped thinking about it since. About what it meant that he'd looked for her. About what it meant that she was here, hiding in plain sight. Not even hiding particularly well, just small and quiet and not ready. Working through the arithmetic of a grief that didn't resolve to a clean answer no matter how many times she ran the numbers. There was a man in Bay 6 with a dislocated shoulder. She went to help him. The surgery started at 1640. By 1815, the first call went out. Maya heard it from the nurse's station, not an announcement, but the spike in radio traffic, the particular urgency in the voices on the surgical floor, the sound of a crash cart being moved at speed. She was on her feet before she had consciously decided to stand. Rachel's phone buzzed. She read the message. Her face went white. He's coding, Rachel said. Maya was already moving. The surgical floor of St. Mercy General was 3 levels above the ER, and Maya Chun covered those 3 levels in approximately 90 seconds. She knew the route the way she knew most things about this building, not from studying a map, but from the kind of ambient absorption that happens when you're genuinely paying attention to your environment. Always, because the habit of knowing your terrain is one of those things that gets wired into you when you spend long enough in places where not knowing your terrain could kill you and the person next to you and the person you're trying to save. The scene outside or 3 was controlled chaos on the edge of losing its control. 2 surgical nurses were in the corridor. One was on a phone. The other was very pale, with the specific pallor of someone who has just watched something go wrong in a way that felt preventable. Through the small reinforced window in the door, Maya could see the monitors, the flat, ugly absence of normal rhythm on the cardiac screen, and Blake's back, rigid with the tension of a man who is good at what he does and has just encountered the edge of what he knows. Captain Webb was already there. He had arrived with a speed that suggested he had not moved far from the surgical floor since Morrison went in, and his face was doing something that faces like his were not built for. Fear. Not the wild kind. The contained, devastating kind that is worse because it understands exactly what it's afraid of. He turned when he heard Maya's footsteps. They won't let me in, he said. Tell me what happened. Positioning caused the iliac to. He stopped. His jaw worked. It did exactly what you said it would do. He destabilized on the table. Blake got the hemorrhage temporarily controlled, but then there was a cardiac event. He's in VFib. Blake is running the code, but he's another stop. He doesn't know the blast injury pattern. He's running a textbook code on a non-textbook injury, and it's not. The door opened. Nair came out, mask pulled down to her chin, and the expression on her face was the specific expression of someone who has just been doing something that hasn't worked and is now standing in a corridor making a decision they didn't expect to have to make today. She looked at Maya and Webb, and she said, very carefully, we need help. Get her in there, Webb said. He pointed at Maya. Nair looked at Maya. She looked at Webb. She looked at Maya again. The calculation was visible on her face. Every professional instinct she had firing in multiple directions simultaneously. Get her in there now, Webb said, and the quality of his voice in that moment was not loud and was not aggressive, but was the absolute, load-bearing voice of a man who means precisely and exactly what he says and has never in his adult life said something he didn't mean. Or this man dies on that table, and I will personally ensure that every decision made in this hospital in the last 4 hours, including who was told what, and when, and what they chose to do about it, is reviewed by every relevant authority from the Joint Chiefs to the State Medical Board. Do you understand me? The corridor was very quiet. Nair looked at Maya. Maya was already assessing. Her eyes were at the window, reading the monitors, reading the body positions of the people inside, reading the situation the way she had read 100 situations, with the specific, total attention of someone for whom assessment is not a preliminary step, but the act itself. I need to scrub in, she said. Now, you're not medically licensed to. I have surgical training and field experience directly applicable to this injury pattern. Her voice was very calm. Perfectly, professionally calm. You can spend the next 30 seconds questioning my credentials, or you can open that door. Master Chief Morrison has approximately that long before the window closes. She looked at Nair directly. Your choice. Nair opened the door. What happened in or 3 in the next 40 minutes was not documented in the official incident report with full accuracy. What the incident report would later state, that consulting medical personnel provided critical support during an intraoperative emergency, stabilizing the patient and allowing the primary surgical team to complete the procedure. What actually happened, as witnessed by 4 surgical nurses, 2 scrub technicians, and Dr. Priya Nair. Maya Chen walked into, or 3, assessed the situation in approximately 8 seconds, asked for a specific set of instruments that the scrub tech scrambled to locate, and began to work. She talked as she worked, not for the benefit of the room, but with the particular narration of someone who has operated in conditions where the person next to them might need to understand what they're doing and take over at any moment. Clear, precise, methodical. Right clamp here. Proximal control first. The bleed is here, not there. Yes, there. You see that? That's the pattern. That's what you look for in blast mechanism. This is different from penetrating trauma. Watch. Blake stood back. He had been mid-code when she came in, and he had turned with something on his face that was prepared to be outrage, and the outrage had not arrived, because there was no room for it. There was only room for watching someone work, and the work itself, its quality, its certainty, made argument feel not just futile, but genuinely absurd, the way it would be absurd to argue with a river about its direction. There is a quality in truly exceptional surgeons, not the technically proficient ones, not even the excellent ones, but the exceptional few, where the work seems to happen with a kind of inevitability, as though the correct answer to each problem was already known and the hands are simply expressing it. It is the difference between watching someone solve a puzzle and watching someone for whom the puzzle's solution is simply visible from the beginning, who moves through it the way water moves through a channel it has carved itself. Blake had thought, for 23 years of surgical practice, that he had that quality. He was watching it now for what felt, with uncomfortable clarity, like the first time. Morrison's heart came back at the 22-minute mark. The rhythm stabilized. The bleeding was controlled. The axillary fragments, which Blake had deprioritized, were extracted with a technique that one of the scrub nurses would later try, unsuccessfully, to describe to her colleagues in language that quite captured it. When it was over, Maya stepped back. Her hands stopped. She looked at the monitors, stable, climbing, returning to the territory of the recoverable. She looked at Morrison's face above the surgical draping and she exhaled, once, very quietly, in the particular way of someone releasing something they had been holding in their chest. Blake had not moved from his position at the side of the room. His mask was down. His face was doing something complicated, the complex rearranging of a man whose internal map of certain things has just turned out to be wrong. Where? He said, and then stopped, and then started again. Where did you train? Maya was already pulling off her gloves. Everywhere, she said, and left it at that. Dr. Linda Walsh, Chief Medical Officer of St. Mercy General, arrived at the hospital at 1945 to find Captain Marcus Webb waiting in her office. He had not been invited. He was sitting in the chair across from her desk with the patient immovability of a man who will still be there when you return, however long you take. On the desk in front of him was a sealed manila envelope. Walsh stopped in the doorway. Captain, she said carefully. Dr. Walsh. He stood. The courtesy of it was somehow more significant than if he hadn't. "We need to talk about one of your employees," he told her. Not the way he'd told Rachel. Not with the warmth of someone sharing a story, but with the methodical precision of a formal briefing. Dates, operations, save rates, commendations. He had it all in the envelope, the parts that weren't classified, redacted with crisp black lines that left what remained unmistakably a portrait of extraordinary service. Walsh read in silence. The Silver Star citation, the Distinguished Service Commendation, the field operation reports, the ones that weren't redacted, describing surgical interventions under conditions that Walsh, a physician of 28 years' experience, found genuinely difficult to process as real. Not because she doubted them, but because the gap between what those reports described and what she had seen in the ER corridor over the past 8 months required a significant cognitive recalibration. 247 confirmed saves. The number sat on the page, and Walsh sat with it. "She's been working here for 8 months, Walsh said. "As a floor nurse." "Yes." She applied as a nurse. Her credentials listed nursing qualifications, field medicine training. Her medical license lapsed when she left service, Webb said. She was in the process of reinstatement. She applied honestly and listed what she currently held. She didn't list the rest. He paused. She wasn't seeking recognition. She needed to work. She needed something structured, something where she could be useful without having to be exceptional. A careful pause. She needed to recover from something, and she was doing that in the only way she knew how, by working with her hands and taking care of people. She wasn't hiding, exactly. She was healing. Walsh set the papers down. The surgery tonight. She saved his life. Direct. Unambiguous. Dr. Blake's team was losing him. She came in, and in 40 minutes, she did what his surgical team could not do, using a combination of field technique and vascular procedure that was witnessed by 7 people and will be documented accordingly. He looked at Walsh steadily. She also, to be clear, correctly identified the vascular injury 6 hours before surgery and informed Dr. Blake of her concern and was told to go change bedpans. Walsh was very still for a long moment. Then she said, "Where is she now?" Maya was in the family waiting area on the surgical floor, sitting alone in a plastic chair in the corner, drinking bad coffee, still in her surgical scrubs with her hair loose from its braid. Rachel had found her 20 minutes earlier and had sat down next to her and not said anything, which was the right instinct. They had sat in silence for a while, which was the second right instinct. Then Walsh had appeared in the doorway. Walsh sat down in the adjacent chair. She looked at Maya for a long moment. Maya looked back. "I owe you an apology," Walsh said, "on behalf of this institution." "You didn't know?" Maya said. "I should have." Walsh's voice was controlled, but there was something in it, the specific quality of a senior person in medicine who has seen something that recalibrates their sense of what they might be missing. "What happened tonight?" "What has been happening, from what I'm told. Dr. Blake's conduct toward you is a separate matter." "It is not a separate matter," Walsh said firmly. "It is deeply related. You were dismissed, repeatedly, in ways that nearly cost your patient his life. And the dismissal was not based on your clinical assessment. It was based on an assumption about your status." "Yes," Maya said. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't bitter. She stated it the way she stated most things, with a precision that was neither accusation nor exoneration, just the shape of the truth as it was. "And that assumption is made about nurses every day in this building, Dr. Walsh. Not just me. And most of them are nurses, not surgeons in disguise who happen to let their licenses lapse." She looked at her coffee. "That's the problem worth solving. Not just what happened to me specifically." Walsh absorbed this for a long moment. "Your license reinstatement," she said. "How far along?" 2 more weeks of processing, approximately. "When it clears," Walsh began, and Maya raised one hand slightly. "One thing at a time," she said quietly. "Let's see how he's doing first." Morrison was out of recovery and into a surgical ICU room by 2100 hours. His vitals were stable. The monitors were well behaved. Webb stood in his corner. A psycho nurse completed her hourly check. Maya came in at 21:30. Morrison's eyes tracked to her immediately. He had been watching the door. "You were here," he said. His voice was rough, still running through the residue of anesthesia, but present. "In the OR? I could hear your voice. You shouldn't have been conscious enough to hear anything." "I was conscious enough." Something that was not quite a smile, but was its predecessor. I know your voice. She sat down in the chair beside his bed. She looked at him with her full attention, the way she always looked at her patients, with the respect owed to people who are temporarily at their most vulnerable and who deserve to have someone see them clearly in that moment. Thank you, Morrison said. Twice, Webb said from the corner, and his voice had lost its usual flatness. Just for a moment, the controlled precision breaking slightly in the way that even very controlled things sometimes do. Morrison looked at Webb, then back at Maya. I know, he said. I know she has. His eyes found hers, and in them was something that had been looking for a place to land for 2 years. Why'd you disappear? Maya's hands were folded in her lap. She looked at them briefly, then back at him. Ahmad, she said. Morrison was quiet. Ahmad al-Rashid, she said. Your interpreter. He was your friend, and you'd introduced him to me 3 weeks before, and when they brought him in she stopped. Steadied herself with the breath of someone who has practiced this, who has learned to hold things without being crushed by them. The injury was unsurvivable. I knew it was unsurvivable before I opened him. I worked on him for 40 minutes anyway, because that's what I do. And when someone I'm working on dies anyway, I know in my head that the injury was unsurvivable, and I know in my hands that the injury was unsurvivable, but the rest of me, the rest of you doesn't care about unsurvivable, Morrison said. No, she said. It doesn't. The monitors ticked. Outside, the hospital made its sounds, the sounds of a place that never fully sleeps, of people being tended to, of the ordinary ongoing work of keeping people alive. Ahmad wouldn't want this, Morrison said finally. His voice was quiet and absolute. He wouldn't want ghost hands hiding in a corridor. I know. He told me once. Morrison shifted, carefully, the way you move when you're handling a memory that costs you. He said his job was worth it because of who was coming after. The people who were going to put things back together. The doctors, the builders, the ones with steady hands who knew where to put them. He looked at her directly. He meant people like you. Maya was quiet for a long time. The room breathed around them. I know, she said finally. I'm starting to let myself believe that. The formal review of Dr. Harrison Blake's conduct was initiated at 8 o'clock the following morning. It was not, technically, the first review of his conduct. There had been 2 prior nursing staff complaints, both settled in the murky administrative territory between documentation and discretion. There had been a residency grievance 5 years ago, characterized at the time as a personality conflict. There had been a patient family complaint absorbed by the legal department without reaching his file. What there had not been, previously, was a documented incident in which a physician had physically pushed a Silver Star recipient out of his way in front of 14 witnesses, dismissed her clinical assessment of a vascular injury, and then required emergency assistance from that same person to prevent the death of a decorated special operations veteran. The documentation assembled in 48 hours was, by any measure, comprehensive. Walsh had it. The Joint Chiefs Liaison Office had been in contact. General Patricia Holloway, who commanded a Special Operations Medical Support Unit and who had arrived at the hospital Thursday afternoon to check on Morrison's condition, had reviewed the security footage from the trauma bay and from the surgical floor corridor. She had watched, in particular, the footage from Bay 4 on Tuesday morning. The shove, the kidney basin hitting the floor, the gauze scattering, the absolute, damning silence of every person in the room. The girl picking up the basin, smoothing her scrubs, turning back to the patient. Holloway was 58 years old. She had gray hair cut close and the posture of someone who has been responsible for other people for so long that responsibility has become structural. She watched the footage twice. Her face gave nothing away in the watching. Then she asked to see Dr. Blake. The meeting lasted 25 minutes. No recording exists. What is known is that Blake emerged looking like a man who has just had a very clear-eyed accounting of several years of decisions laid in front of him simultaneously. A man seeing the arithmetic of his own conduct from the outside, in numbers that don't lie. He found Maya in the corridor outside Morrison's room later that afternoon. There was a specific quality to the corridor at that moment. The stillness of a space where something important is about to happen. The subtle gathering of people who find themselves nearby by coincidence and decide not to move. Blake stopped in front of her. Maya looked up from the patient notes she was reviewing. He stood there for a moment with the specific difficulty of a man who has been in the wrong for so long that the mechanics of being in the right feel unfamiliar. The awkward repositioning of someone trying on a thing they haven't worn before. He started. He stopped. He looked at the floor briefly, then back at her. I was wrong, he said. About Morrison. About the vascular assessment. I should have listened. A pause. His jaw worked. And about what happened on Tuesday. He stopped again. I shouldn't have touched you. It was wrong. I'm sorry. Maya looked at him. Her expression was attentive and neutral. The same expression she turned on most things. Not cold, not warm, simply present. She let the apology exist in the space between them without rushing to fill the space around it. Thank you for saying so, she said. She went back to her notes. Blake stood there a second longer than necessary, in the particular suspended moment of a man who expected something, rebuttal or condemnation, or at least a longer reckoning, and received instead a brief acknowledgement and a woman returning to her work. Then he walked away. Rachel, who had been approximately 12 feet down the corridor, appeared at Maya's side within 4 seconds. Did he just apologize to you? Sort of, Maya said. What does sort of mean? It means he got further than I expected and not as far as he should have, and I think it cost him something that was genuinely hard to spend. She closed the patient folder. Which counts for something. Rachel stared at her. You are the most frustrating person I have ever worked with. I've been told that. By whom? Maya thought about it. The honest answer was a list that included several colonels, a 2-star general, and a field medic named Diego who had told her this in 3 languages simultaneously while she was operating on his squad leader. Generals, mostly, she said. Rachel opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. I need you to explain so many things to me, she said. At length. With specific examples. One day, Maya said, when there are no patients. She went to check on the man in Bay 11, who had been waiting 40 minutes and deserved someone's full attention. Morrison was discharged 14 days later, on a Thursday afternoon that was cool and overcast and smelled like the beginning of rain. He walked out, slowly, with a cane, with Webb on one side and the specific, careful carriage of a man relearning his body's tolerances, but walking, upright, out through the sliding glass doors into the gray afternoon with the deliberateness of someone who knows exactly how close they came to not doing this, and who is choosing, consciously, to notice. Maya was outside. She was not in scrubs. She was in civilian clothes, jeans, a worn navy jacket, her hair down for the first time anyone at the hospital had seen it. She was leaning against the low wall by the entrance with her hands in her pockets, and when Morrison came through the doors and saw her, he stopped and looked at her, and the expression on his face was the uncomplicated kind. The kind that doesn't require interpretation because it's too simple for that. Just a man, seeing a person he was looking for, finding them. Weren't going to say goodbye without me? He asked. Weren't going to leave without saying goodbye, she corrected. He laughed. It was a good sound, rough and genuine, and the laugh of a man who has come back from somewhere far and finds the ordinary act of laughing unexpectedly, specifically good. Webb stood back, with the tact of someone who understands when a moment belongs to other people. They're reinstating your license, Morrison said. Not a question. 2 more days of processing. Maya looked at the parking lot, the gray sky, the ordinary Thursday afternoon existence of a hospital in a mid-sized city. Walsh offered me a position. Attending surgeon, trauma department. And she had thought about it for 14 days. She had thought about it every morning and every afternoon, and sometimes at 3 a.m., lying in her apartment listening to the city make its sounds. She had thought about Ahmad, who would not want this. She had thought about Morrison in a ditch in Syria, who had lived. She had thought about the 12 packages of gauze on a linoleum floor, and a man with a 90% occluded coronary artery, who had lived. She had thought about the resident who had watched her be shoved and hadn't said anything, and about how that resident would one day be an attending, and about who they might become depending on what they learned to see. I think I'm going to take it, she said. Something settled in Morrison, visibly, the way things settle in people who have been carrying a concern and have now been given permission to put it down. Ahmad would be glad, he said. Maya was quiet for a moment. The parking lot moved around them. A family came out carrying flowers and a Mylar balloon. Someone reversed a car carefully out of a space. I know, she said. I'm starting to let myself believe that. They stood there for a while, the combat surgeon and the special operations legend, in a hospital parking lot on a gray afternoon, with the whole ordinary world continuing around them. Eventually Morrison extended his free hand, and Maya took it, and they shook. Once, firm and real, the handshake of two people who know exactly what they're shaking on and what it cost to get here. "Don't disappear again," he said. "I won't," she said. She watched his car until it turned out of the lot and was gone. Then she stood in the gray afternoon for another moment, hands in her pockets, and she thought about Ahmad, and she thought about Syria, and she thought about the specific weight of things you carry and the specific work of learning to carry them without letting them stop your hands. Then she turned and went back inside. The new residency class arrived the following Monday. 12 young doctors, freshly graduated, walking the halls of St. Mercy General with the combination of terror and optimism that characterizes the first day of residency anywhere that matters. They had received their schedules, their login credentials, their locker assignments. They had been briefed on their attending physicians. They had been told almost nothing about the new trauma attending, except her name. Maya found them in the break room at 6:45, clustered around the coffee machine in the way that new residents cluster around coffee machines, with the desperate reverence of people for whom caffeine has recently become existential. She stood in the doorway and introduced herself without ceremony. "I'm Dr. Chun," she said. "I'll be your trauma attending. A few things you should know about how I run a service." 12 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Various degrees of nervousness. One resident, young, earnest, with the kind of face that still wore all of its feelings on the outside, was already holding a pen over a notepad. "First, I will never dismiss a clinical concern because of who raises it. I don't care if you've been here a day and the nurse has been here 20 years, or the other way around. If someone at this bedside has a concern about a patient, it gets heard. Every time. Full stop." She poured herself a cup of coffee. "Second, you will make mistakes. I will not humiliate you for them. I will teach you. I take that distinction seriously." She looked around the room. The earnest resident raised his hand. "Dr. Chun, I heard, some people call you." He hesitated, the way you hesitate when you're not sure if you're about to say something inappropriate about someone's classified military history. "Is it true that you're actually—" "I'm Dr. Maya Chun," she said. "I'm your attending physician. That's all that matters in this department." She picked up her coffee. "Now, let's go see some patients." She walked out of the break room and into the controlled, humming urgency of the ER floor. The monitors, the voices, the distant rolling of a gurney. The ordinary, extraordinary business of a place that never fully sleeps. Behind her, she heard 12 pairs of footsteps, uncertain at first, then steadying, then keeping pace. Somewhere ahead, a monitor beeped. A resident called a name. A family waited in the blue chairs by the window. The work was waiting. Ghost Hands was back.